All right. Thanks everyone for waking up early here on a Thursday. And we have a special webinar here today being brought to you by Career Services in Atlanta. So someone I know for several years now, a good friend, also went to North Texas, is another drummer friend. He has produced the last several records for us and Sister Hazel. When I'm on vacation, he also comes out and drums for me. So super friend, great musician, awesome producer. I'm excited to let him share, especially in the times that we're in now. He was doing this before the pandemic, but being able to track drums at his own studio, people will send him Pro Tools sessions, either replacing drums or sending a track that they want. His drum sounds, he also makes loops and does music production. So I will turn it over to Mr. Ben Jackson.
What's up, everybody? So thanks, Mark, for asking me to do this. It's gonna be fun. Absolutely, ask questions. I'm on my phone, so I can move around a little bit. So if I don't see one of the questions, I'll kind of rely on Mark to make sure I'm getting what I need. But yeah, ask away. I was gonna kind of take you through. We talked about this before we got on, and I was just gonna kind of take you guys through my spot a little bit and show you a little bit of the setup and the signal flow and the mic situation and everything, just so you can kind of see what it is and how I'm doing it. And then we can kind of talk about the nitty gritty of how it all actually goes down in the real world, which is different every time. But yeah, so I'll kind of flip over to the other view here, if I can figure out how. There we go. And so I'm in my control room right now. I converted a building actually the building's only finished by about a month or so, but I converted what was an old garage shop kind of exterior building into a studio over about a year. And so I've got a couple of rooms. And so I've got a live room, which you can see through the window. And then I've got kind of two large ISO booths as well as a control room. And what I'm doing as far as, well, since we're in here, we can start in here, I guess. I'm basically, if I was concerning drum tracking specifically, I basically leave my stuff set up. So my kit's in there, we'll get in there in a second. And all of my outboard that I have, I pretty much exclusively use for tracking. I decided a while back that I look at my outboard as a way to get sound in and sculpt it that way. I don't typically, when I mix through a lot of outboard. It makes recall a lot more difficult, and it's more time consuming, and I feel like clients want things faster now. And so with things sounding so good in the box, I'm pretty much just using it for tracking. And so everything's kind of my mess of a patch bay. And then I'll just kind of quickly run you guys through sort of what everything's going through. And so I've like anybody would, I template out my sessions, and thanks to Pro Tools track presets, I'm using that now and just kind of pulling everything in. And so I'm doing like kick in, kick out, snare top, snare side, which we'll talk about, one mic on each tom, hat, overheads, rooms, kind of a crushed, over compressed mic for an effect. And then that's all the standard stuff, as well as a lot of times I'm running things through like part of the drum mix out of the patch bay through radials and into some pedals. And so it just depends on what the track needs.
Thank you.
But rather than dedicate a mic to that chain, I found that I like just sort of combining usually some of the close mics and running a send, like an aux send out of Pro Tools through that and back in on a track. And so I can tube screamers or delays or reverbs or whatever. We did some of that on the Sister Hazel stuff too, tracked a few things through some pedals, and that can be kind of a nice color. But gear wise is I use the APIs up here One of them is on, I think, the snare side mic, and two of them are my overheads. And I spent a lot of time when I got this building finished with a couple of friends that are engineers. And we spent a lot of time dialing drums in so that we could kind of leave them static and make small adjustments for the track. So you'll see, like, these are down, like the gain is 100% down on my overheads, but that's because they're so hot coming out that's all it needs. You're getting a ton of signal, but that seemed to be the best color versus driving them harder and padding them. We went through a lot of that mic placement for a long time, and then gain staging all the pre's, and then we kind of came in and added EQ and compression. And so we really tried to kind of get it as good with just mic placement as we could, and then just with gain staging, and saved sort of the sculpting stuff for last. As far as the 500 series stuff goes, other than the Chandler on the left, I built all these, and 4 of them are the Cappy pre's. If you guys aren't familiar with Jeff Steiger, who's up here now doing these kits, they're amazing, and Jeff's amazing. And so those are Tom 1 and 2. I believe hi-hat mic is on the one that's got the Phantom on, and I'm pretty sure the other ones are reserved for bass right now. And then my rooms are going through these Hairball Bronze that are kind of a little bit more dirty, gritty preamps. Whatever this is, Hairball Copper, I think is what it's called, is a little Nevish, if you believe in that kind of thing. It does what it does, and it sounds good, and it's on kick in. And then the Chandler's on snare top. And then the only other things I've got going right now, I guess one of the other preamp here is the Smash mic, actually, not bass. And then other than that, I think, like, there may be a handful of effect mics at times that I keep a little Focusrite. I can't even remember what the thing's called, to be honest with you, but one of these old, just kind of 8 pre kind of deals that I don't mind throwing a snare bottom through it if I'm doing a live session and I need to open up a better preamp for bass or an acoustic guitar or something like that. And then the passive TG channels I keep open for piano or acoustic or vocals. And the reason for that, even though they're great, I love them, but rather than having to repatch every time I'm doing drum tracks and then tear it all apart when I go to do a full production with somebody, I'm trying to kind of leave this stuff so that it's fast to move through. I'd love to put my Chandlers on my overheads or on my snare and kick or whatever, but the truth of the matter is it slows me way down when I'm in here by myself to have to come back in here and dig through the patch bay. And so everything's sort of meant to live as statically as it can. And then the other bay here, right now, my chain for kick is that preamp into the Great River EQ, and that's kick in, and that's it. It goes straight in from there. Snare top goes through the Chandler preamp into this Warm Pultec, which is doing a great job. And then I think toms are going Cappy to the 560s. I really like being able to EQ kick and toms. The Mogs are taking care of overheads, which are Coles. And then this stereo compressor here is doing my rooms. And that thing's cool. If you're not familiar with the Alicia Expressor, it's great because it has a gain reduction limiting feature. So I can drive it pretty hard and it will kind of compress the same amount. So it kind of keeps the tone similar even through a range of dynamics that I might be playing. Versus a standard compressor, if I wanted it to hit -8 at a quiet dynamic, it would just be obliterating it when I got loud. And it won't let it do that. And so then the 1176's one is on the snare side some of the time, and some of the time it's not. And then one of them is for the crush mic, and that's the all buttons in one on top, and we're just knocking the crap out of it. And so that's kind of the basic signal flow of everything in here and what I'm doing with it. And again, the concept is all about trying to keep things moving because it's just me. I don't have an engineer. I don't have a team of people here. And so when a track comes in, a lot of times the best thing for everybody is if I can turn it around sounding great and I can turn it around really quickly. And so without having to come out here and make a bunch of decisions on how I'm going to set up drums today, that allows me to basically get their track, put it in Pro Tools. I'm pulling in my template on top of whatever they've sent me, whether they send me a session or just a couple of stems. My track presets are ready to go, and within 2 minutes, I'm ready to go out there and start running through stuff. I'll typically mark the sessions and stuff. I find that sometimes faster than writing a chart. If I can just mark where the verses and choruses are, I can kind of use the timeline in Pro Tools with the screen out there to basically substitute for sitting down and writing a chart too. So yeah, we'll just walk out here and see kind of where everything's going.
Ben, can you hear me?
Yeah.
What's your A to D?
Oh yeah, good question. Apollo, the blackface Apollo 16 right now, and adding another one is on my list so that I can end up with more than I need. Right now, I'm dedicating, I think 12 channels to drums steadily, 13 or 14 if I do the pedal thing. And so then if I've got a live session, I'll do 12 and track, if there's 3 of us, or I'll go down to 11, if I've got another guy, like another acoustic or whatever. But yeah, I've really been happy with the Apollo stuff. It's great. Cool. And it's user friendly and it sounds good.
Let me see if anyone, before you go out there, has any questions. Anyone have any questions about his gear on coming into Pro Tools and preamps for stuff before he goes out in the tracking room? If you have any questions, you can raise your hand from managed participants, or you can type a question into the chat. Looks like everyone's cool. I don't see any questions. All right.
Cool. Don't hold them back.
And for people that joined after we started, if you do have a question, you can either put it into the chat or you can raise your hand, because I have everyone muted except for Ben and I now. And then I'll unmute you. Can you ask your question? So he's out in his new tracking room now.
So out here, you can see I'm kind of keeping a kit set up and mic'd all the time. And then to one side of the kit, I've got a shelf with 2 other kits and then some spare kick drums. And then to the other side, a rack of all my snares that I like to track with. And again, all of this to me is about being able to move as efficiently as I can. If other people are here, they don't want to wait on me to change stuff out. In a live session in Nashville, typically I wouldn't be able to change anything more than maybe some hi-hats and a ride cymbal and a snare drum between tracks. It's not very, it's a little frowned upon to change kick drums between tracks on a live session that's trying to move fast. But that's one advantage of having my own spot, is I can change the kit, a kick drum, anything. And the way I'm setting everything up, and we'll go a little bit through that before we get into the miking stuff, is meant to be that way. So like, for instance, I've got, even my rack tom is on a snare stand. That's just because every different kind of kit has a different setup for a mounting hardware for a tom. And so all this kit can be taken down. I actually put something up on Instagram about a week ago where I changed the kit out with a time lapse. And I felt like when I watched the time lapse that the time lapse was longer than it took me to actually do it. We had the whole kit changed out in about 5 minutes. And so being able to do that and sort of positioning hardware and choosing hardware options that allow you to be really fluid with that move is sort of giving me the opportunity to get a different tone. And I kind of look at the whole thing just like a guitar player would. A guitar player is not going to just bring his Strat and a tube screamer to a session. He's going to have a couple guitars, a bunch of pedals, maybe multiple amp heads to get different colors. And I think recording drums in a modern situation, that has become more and more the expectation on albums, is not just a good part and a good performance, but the right sounds, and the tone shaping is huge, probably bigger than it's ever been. And so I want to be able to serve whatever sort of track it is and not just have a single sound in here. And so all of it's set up to be able to do that. And does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah, someone has a question that just kind of maybe missed a part of the first thing, but which mics are going through a pre only and which are going through a pre and EQ or pre and compressor?
Fair. Okay. Let me try to answer that as we go through the mics themselves. That's probably the best way to do that. And so, for me, and I'm not super precious about all this stuff, guys. So some of it is what it is. I'm not real worried about whether or not I've got a D112 or a Beta 52. I happen to have a Beta 52. I like it. I've had it since I was about 15, and that's why I don't have another one, because I already had it. And I've gotten to know it, and I know where to put it. It's going through a preamp and an EQ and no compression. I don't feel like I need to compress kick in most of the time. I've got the distressor available if I want to, but yeah, it's getting EQ, and then the kick out mic is not. It's going through a preamp and no EQ. It's just mic placement to get it where I want it. And that does vary from drum to drum, and from tone to tone. Moving it back or forward will make a pretty big difference. And finding a sweet spot on the drum where you're getting the kind of low end without a lot of the flappy, papery sound can be challenging. You know, typically the more towards the center you can go, the more focused the tone's going to be. But it does depend on the drum and how it's tuned. As far as snare, I am going for, I'm using the 441 from Sennheiser as my top mic, and I love it because it's, you guys might know better than me, I think it's super cardioid. Is that more cardioid than hypercardioid? Whichever one is the most narrow is what it is. And it has what looks like a low pass filter on it, or high pass filter on it, but it's not. It's actually backwards. It's a high boost, which is great on top snare, because most of the time snare drums top mics just sound like thunk, and then you get all your actual snare sound from overheads and from the underside mic. And this brightens it up, and it sounds a lot more like what you're kind of looking for. And then that's Chandler pre, and then the Pultec EQ to boost some top end. And depending on the drum, I may boost a little bit of the low end around 200 to get a little bit more kind of chest pump out of it. And then the I've got an SM7 right now, but again, not super precious about that. A 57 would be fine. Anything that's just sort of generically a dynamic mic. And I'm pointing it, I don't know how well you guys can see this, but instead of having it underneath, I've got it on the side. That's something I started doing a couple years ago. Rami Antun that started this drum company, ANF, kind of hipped me to that idea. And most of the time I really like it. You get shell sound. You still get lots of sizzle from the snare drum. It's much more usable to me in a mix. When I mix records that I produce, I find myself using that mic a lot more in the final product. Whereas I feel like a lot of times we track things because we've been taught that you put a mic on the bottom snare, or you put a mic on the hi-hat, and we don't really have players and producers, and even a lot of tracking engineers don't really pay much attention sometimes to what's even getting used in the end. And if it's not going to get used in the end, you don't really need it. And so I've got a mic because, again, I leave things statically placed. I've got a 57 underneath for a client that might want that. Some producers really know that they want that. So it's there, and that's just a quick patch change for me. Same pre, no EQ. So that's just a mic and a pre, and those things together blended seem to work really well. I don't compress those on the way in either. I've run it as a mult too, where I take the top mic, hit the preamp, hit the EQ, and then mult it in the patch bay. So one goes pre-EQ and then straight to A to D, and then the other one goes to a compressor and gets smashed and then goes to another channel in the A to D. But again, it was a thing where I was not finding it was getting used enough to make it a normal part of my setup. And so my stuff's always sort of evolving based on what I'm finding myself using.
Hey, I got a quick thing for you, Ben, because I can see
Yeah.
your pedal down there, and I know this is kind of a big deal for you, even with working with you. Why don't you tell them too, like how different beaters can really shape the tone of the kick drum too? Because I know you.
Oh yeah, man. So let I'm glad you brought that up, man. So yeah, that's a hard square felt beater. That's as important as you know, a pick is to a guitar player, or a sticks versus brushes. It's huge. It's not all done with EQ and preamps and mic placement. A lot of it should be done by the player and the source. And so I keep a bunch of these things, and Mark knows because I used to make him use them all the time on the records. I keep a handful of beaters around that all do sort of different things, and that's not even all of them that are in here. But you know, anything from yarn, which they make now, these little puffy ones. This one that's actually, it looks like a puffy one, but it's just kind of worn out. It's actually felt. And changing those out is enormous as far as shaping the tone. And so I do a lot of that. I will change to heavier sticks or lighter sticks. I'll do whatever I've got to do to get the tone out of the instrument. And then it's a lot easier to record the sound if it sounds like what you wanted to begin with. And then see, where were we? Hat, stock, like 451B preamp, no EQ. And then I'm rocking 421s on toms. Again, they're kind of the first thing I got for toms. I've used other things that are great. 414s can be great. A lot of things can be great, but these are fine. They're fantastic. And then pre and EQ, a good healthy carving of EQ on these. But placement, especially on the close mic placement, is such a big deal to get the sound the way you want. And I find that's really true of toms. Like a little bit off and you get way more overtone than focused punch, or you don't get enough low end. And so taking the time to sort of find, it's not so much about what mic you're using, it's about where you're putting it. And you know, even like you can notice on my floor tom, it's way in, like it's way in. But it sounds, and it's way up. It's almost, you know, it's my whole hand up off the surface, pointed at the middle, and that's where it sounds great. And I'm surprised even that I'm getting away with pointing it that much towards the ride cymbal, but I am. And so it's out of the way that way, and everything's cool. My probably favorite thing that I've got for recording drums are these. Using Cole's ribbon mics as overheads, I have really enjoyed, especially when they're paired. The API pre's are fast on transients, which is nice and pretty bright. And then I'll run them, because they're ribbons and they're dark, I run them through those Moog EQs and boost a lot of the air that I need. And I'll cut, usually I forgot what the setting on the Moog is, but pretty much with overheads, I'm scooping out something between 850 and 650 a little bit. There's a mid-range there that can be kind of wonky in overheads a lot of the time. And so I'm using those, and they're not very high. They're only, I don't know if you'll be able to back up enough for you to see it, you know, just a little bit off the top of the kit, because and the room's tall. I mean, I've got a 12-foot ceiling in the room, so I could have them up really high. But again, that's a thing we've experimented with, and the more, because they're figure eight, they're ribbons, right? So they're picking up just as much of what's above them as what's below them. And this is keeping them fairly low is what makes them sound pretty tight and focused, and yet enough of the room. That's where I wanted to find a balance to get. I want you to hear the room, but I don't want you to mostly hear the room out of my overheads. I want you to mostly hear drums. And so those are EQ'd, also not compressed. About the only thing right now that I'm steadily compressing is this mic here that's on the floor, or real close to the floor. And this is a really wacky placement. It's about 1.5 feet off the floor, probably, pointed down at the floor. And so you guys can see, I'll kind of give you try to give you a straight on shot of exactly what it's pointing at. It's literally pointing sort of at nothing, but it's picking up a ton of kick and snare there and rejecting a lot of cymbals. And that's the one that's going through it's going through a preamp, no EQ, but it's going through a Blue Stripe 1176 with all buttons in. So it's just getting annihilated. And it provides some distortion and some thickness that's really, really nice to have. And it really kind of almost acts, because it's so compressed, as like a mono room mic. It sounds like it's further away than it is, but that placement was all about one of us in here playing and the other one listening on headphones through the cue box and finding a spot that was getting the balance that we were looking for from the kit. We didn't want a lot of cymbals in it because then it becomes useless, and we didn't really need a lot of toms in it. It's mostly for kick and snare, and so that happened to be the sweet spot. I've done that same trick kind of over the kick, pointed at the snare before, and that works really well sometimes. It works better on a ribbon mic when you can reject the ride cymbal, and so that's the sweet spot here. And then the last drum mic that's permanent is I'm using one of these, just trying it now, one of these Stager stereo ribbons. And I've been happy with it. And again, it's in a little bit of a weird spot in the room. It's up high. Sorry, I'm trying to drive this gimbal and I'm not used to it. It's up high and it's pretty far away. You know, it's about 15 feet away from the kit. But we found a handful of good spots in the room for where it was sounding great. And that one was one of the 3 or 4 that we liked. And it was the most practical to leave it where it was. And so it lives there and doesn't move.
Hey, Ben, you got a question.
Yep.
Someone was asking, like, what's the measurement on the overheads from the snare drum approximately?
Good question. Let me check and give you some accurate info on that. Let's look. It's, it's a little more than 2 drumsticks worth, so.
Drumsticks are usually 16 inches, somewhere in there.
Right. So you're looking at like maybe 3 feet off the snare drum, and so not super high, not super low. And the right one is slightly lower, so that the distances are the same and keep it in phase with the snare drum.
And for other people that have been joining as we've been going through here, if you have a question, you can go ahead and hit us up on the chat, or you can raise your hand as well on the participants, and I'll find you. Someone else just asked a question. Do you find that since having the mic pointed at the shell rather than the bottom on the snare, do you loosen the snares?
No, not necessarily. It's going to pick up whatever's there, and so I pretty much am still treating the drum to sound the way I want it to, and letting the mic pick up what it picks up. And if I do find on certain tracks, and I have, that I really miss having that bottom, then I'll patch it in and either add it or just change the patch out for the side snare. But no, most of the time I can just leave it the way it is. It picks up a lot of snares. It picks up a lot of the bottom.
Couple more questions that are coming in. Are you using 2-ply or single-ply heads?
That's a good question. All single-ply for me. I believe the rack tom, if you saw it closely, you'd say I'm lying because it has an Ambassador X on it, but I lent the kit out for a session not long ago, and that's what they put on there. I'm normally coated Ambassadors and a little bit of moon gel. I find I get the attack and the brightness of the attack that I want versus having 2-ply heads sound a little duller and more pillowy to me, and I can control the amount of muffling by applying gel or towels or whatever, and so all single-ply heads except for the kick drum is a Power Stroke 3.
And I think the other question was, and you may have covered it when you were in the control room, but on that room mic that you showed that was way up, what's the pre-EQ channel strip on that?
Those are going through the Hairball Audio bronze pre's, so those are a little dark and gritty to begin with, and then those are going through that Alicia Expressor stereo compressor, and so they're getting depends on the track and the sound, but for a commercial rock or pop or country or track, loud drums, they're getting a pretty healthy dose of compression.
Another question was, do you ever utilize a sub mic on the kick?
I have one, and I used to. Guess the theme of this is how all this stuff always changes, but I used to use just the inside and the sub mic, and then I went to all 3 for a while. I had the outside and the sub, but since I've been in this building, I have been able to get that outside mic to get way more than adequate amounts of low end, and have not felt the need to add a sub mic back in. I feel like if you get this mic, to me, is much more of a usable thing. Having something that gets all the low end and sounds like a kick drum instead of just the subwoof kind of deal. But if you do need that for the style of music you're doing, it's certainly a good thing to have lying around.
Well, I think even on the Fire record, we built like one of those, sort of channels, like towel channels or blankets, and we put a mic inside of there that was like 2.5 feet away from the drum.
Right, we definitely did that, and it helps. And that's another way to do that same trick. If you don't have the mic, is to just kind of build the tunnel, or put a resonating kick drum that's lower in front of it, and mic that is a way to do it sometimes. That's a little bit of a different tone, but yeah, it's definitely nice to have that option.
Someone's asking you a question regarding cymbals. You tend to use the same brand or line for a recording for a consistent sound?
So I've been a Paiste artist for the last 6 or 7 years, but I'll tell you and that happens to be, they all happen to be Paistes that are up here today. But I have a lot of Zildjian cymbals. I have some Sabian stuff. I have some Bosphorus things. I use cymbals very freely, and I change my rides and my hi-hats many times a day if I'm tracking more than one thing. I don't care about the brand at all. I care about making sure that the sound and the blend for the kit is right. So if it needs, soft hats and a kind of dead, thuddy Levon Helm sound, I'm going to go to those cymbals. If it needs to be bright and cut, like this kit is a big, loud kit, and these cymbals are pretty loud. But I change them all the time.
Do you want to talk about your remote tracking situation there?
Yeah, and as you can see, it's not perfect yet. The building's still new, and I'm still trying to figure it out. So the way we did it is, I didn't want to have to deal with wireless connections through double walls and the lag time, especially because if I do a live session here, when I do, I'm still engineering most of the time. So I'm now engineering from behind the drum kit, and I didn't want guys to have to wait on computer issues. And so my panel, what we built here, takes the Elco is for the stage box that serves all the mics. And then we've got some Cat 5. Some of the Cat 5 is my headphone mixers, but the rest of it is, there's some converters you can get. A little blue box on the ground is one, where it will do USB over Cat 5 or HDMI over Cat 5. And so you can't run an HDMI cable long enough to get from my control room into here through the floor and the walls. So we did it over Cat 5, and then it converts the signal back. I think I don't have a powerful enough one, which is why I'm still getting some of the flickering. But when that is working smoothly, the beauty of it is that it is a zero lag situation. And so I have no problem. You can see the mouse moving. It's like I'm sitting at the computer. And so I can track everything. Once I get ready, I can arm tracks, I can edit, I can do everything I need to sitting right here. And so it's really quick to be able to, playlist stuff and try again and make an edit or punch myself in and put the pre-roll on. All that stuff I utilize all the time to get tracks done as quickly as I can.
Do you have a way to show us how you kind of run a session?
Yeah, sure. So let's see. Maybe the best way to do that will be to put you guys back in the control room for a second. Poor little Gimbal's getting confused.
Where's Dustin when you need him?
Right. So for a standard thing for me, like if I were going to do a drum track for a client, I would be starting in here for sure. And because I've got a template set up, I think the way that this is going to make the most sense is for me to sort of tell you the concept, which is I feel like all of us, what we're trying to do here, and the way I look at all my different jobs, whether I'm producing or just doing a drum track for somebody or programming or whatever, is we're basically problems, right? Like if nobody needs, like I joke all the time with my bass player friends that nobody needs a bass player. And, you know, the joke is, it comes from, you know, hey man, if you ever need somebody to play bass on something, and it's like, nobody needs a bass player. And what I really mean by that is I need, if I'm hiring a bass player for a track, or somebody's hiring me to play drums for a track, what they're doing is that they need a drum performance on a piece of music that they're writing, and they need a specific one. They need specific sounds. They need a specific part. They might not know what that part is, but they, and some of them do, but they need their music to be finished the best way possible. And so everything I'm doing here is I'm trying to solve as many related problems as I can. So if I'm just doing a drum track and that's all they need, that's great. But if they also need some drum programming and some percussion, I'm set up and able to do that. If they need me to produce the entire record, I do that. If they need me to play drums and then mix the record when they're done tracking it, I do that. I don't typically go on the road with an artist all year long. I'll go out for Mark once in a while, but that's kind of an unrelated problem that I'm not looking to solve anymore for people. But when I'm looking at all that, then I'm looking at, there's a lot of people doing this. There's a lot of people that have some sort of tracking setup. Almost anybody can set up something now. And what I'm trying to do is solve that problem now as well as I can, as competitively as I can. And so the outboard, the mics, the room, the drums, all the stuff we've been talking about definitely helps me get a better sound than a guy that has, you know, an 8-channel interface set up in his third bedroom with a couple 57s, right? Like that's why I've done it, is because I feel like I get better results this way. The other half of that, the reason I'm bringing that up now, is I feel like you also have to know what their problem is and what they need out of you the most. And what most of them need out of me is they need it done, and they need it done quickly. So they might want to send it they might want to say, hey man, I'm sending you a track tonight. Can you knock this thing out in the morning? Because we've got the singer coming in the afternoon, and we kind of want to layer the guitars in before she gets here. And so I'm trying to make sure that I'm not wasting time patching gear or setting all the mics up again or any of that stuff, having to tear all my hardware down because I need to change the kit out or whatever. You know, hey, we're doing a Motown sounding thing and we just need it to sound like that. Do you know how to do that? It's like, yep, Ludwig kit, mono overhead, couple close mics, like, but they're already set. So all I got to do is just thin the herd. You know, big modern country production, you know, yep, set up for it. It's good to go. And so same thing when I get in here, it's all about having all my tracks in a track set, whatever they're calling that, saved the track presets or whatever. And then I'll pull in whatever they're going to give me. So if they were going to send me, you know, it doesn't matter. I import whatever they send me, or I open their session and import my tracks into it. And when I'm done, I tend to try to go as many of the extra miles as I can while making making the timelines. So if there's programming on it, which most of the time right now there is, I'm pocketing the drums too before I send them back. I might send them a couple playlists worth of stuff. It depends on the engineer and the producer. If they're the kind that want to go through some options, I'll send it. If they're the kind that really are not, I work with people of all experience levels. If it's their first time and they just got Logic and they're just trying to figure out how to track stuff, man, I'm not going to send them 50 playlists of stuff to go through. They don't have time and they're just going to get frustrated. And so I try to think about all that stuff. And then when I'm done, I will send them a Pro Tools session back, or a Logic session back, or an Ableton session back. Those are the three things I've got, with my tracks in, panning, fader levels at a balance, so that when they pull it into their session, they hear the drum track the way I heard it when I tracked it, not just all faders up and now everything's blasting and they've got to get a drum mix going, because some guys don't have the experience level to know how to do that. And so that's kind of the reality of what we're living in, is there's so many people doing this now on so many different levels that the easier you make it for them, the more often you're going to get called back. So I try to make it as easy as possible. Once they pull it in, it's in, and they can do whatever they want, but it doesn't require them to work just to get it to sound right. And before anybody asks, if they haven't already, no, I don't track them in Ableton or Logic if that's what they're using. I always track my drums in Pro Tools because my editing's better. I'm faster. I will just take them and export them and put them into Logic if that's what they need, and send that out. And so I think having some fluidity amongst a few platforms has been helpful. I know a lot of producers that use Logic that like using me because I don't make it really difficult for them to send me a Logic session. They can send me the session, I can open it, pull out what I want, track it in Pro Tools, put my stuff back in Logic, send them the session back in Dropbox. And so that's kind of, a long-winded explanation, but that is why everything is set up the way it is. So does that kind of give you some useful info, Mark?
Yeah. Do you have something where you can play out there, or is that possible, or do you have a session?
Yeah, let me just kind of get something pulled in here. And keep other questions coming while I'm doing this, by all means. Let's see.
How do you like that Stager mic?
I like it, man. So far, so good. It's. I haven't put it on a lot of sources yet, but it's sounding great. And Matt's local and he's easy to deal with. And I like having stuff that I can like go hand back to the dude if I need it to be worked on.
Right, exactly. Yeah, he's a SA Nashville grad. He's also
is he?
Our home studio expo. Yeah.
Nice. That doesn't surprise me a bit. That's awesome, man. And I've got a Lawson 47 from Gene over there in Berry Hill. It's same deal. I love it because it's so, it's the local guy thing. Here we go. We'll pull one of these in. This is good.
I had a question about the remote cording setup that you have out there by the kit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So are you essentially using that other screen out there as a second monitor and then just running it all off the same like computer?
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. That's exactly what it is. It's just a really, really long run remote monitor.
And then so the way you have it ran, you said you got no lag times. It just flickers because like how the power runs or something like that.
It's because we're running it over Cat 5. So Cat 5, there's an HDMI to Cat 5 converter, and it comes all the way in and then hits the Thunderbolt port on the back of my computer. So it's just like if you had a remote monitor sitting right next to your other one. It's essentially doing the same thing.
Okay.
And so it's hardwired, and that's why it works so well. Yeah.
You might try, Ben, using the same principle that I have here in my house for TV distribution. Like you could probably use a balun off of the Cat 5, and that might fix the flicker situation.
Interesting. Okay, I'll try that. Yeah, I just got the thing up and running about a week ago.
You can transmit HDMI up to 300 feet using a balun. You put the balun at one end and then the balun where the source is. So like that's how all my TVs are distributed through the house through baluns. Gotcha.
Well, I'll try that then. I'm all about wanting to fix that. That's one thing that's irking me at the moment. So here's a session that some of this was tracked here, but a lot of it came from Texas. And so the artist is in Texas. He never showed up to town. He did everything out there. And so what I would do if I pulled a session in that looks like this, we've got some bass stuff, B3 part, acoustics, electrics, and a vocal, right? And so to make my life easy, what I'm probably going to do is take all the instruments and route a send that's just going to go to a stereo pair on my outputs from my Apollo, right? So I've got 16 out on that are normaled through the patch bay into my headphone distribution box, and then I'll put the vocal on a different one, and I'll put the click on a different one, and then the drums will be on one, and so that allows me to get all of my mix and everything that I need to hear out there. And not, again, waste too much time getting any of that to happen. And so if I'm listening through here, like, Pro Tools ran out of caring about you. There you go. So this is kind of what I was sent. Yep, Pro Tools hates us. Surprise. I walk straight in the room. Ooh, that's loud. I'm danced inside the fire. Made my way back outside. And so if I've got that kind of deal, right? So now what I'll do is I'll just kind of show you what I would end up doing. Now that I've got that set up and a basic mix going for it, and I don't have to mess with it too much, I'd head out here and run everything else from out here. And so I'll actually do some of that, and I'll leave you guys in here. You'll at least be able to hear it for the speakers, and I won't be blowing you up quite as badly that way, I hope.
There's 2 questions for you before you go out there. One, I'm not sure if you, it says, have you used the Glenn Johns method for a client before? He wasn't really specific. You there, Ben, or we lose you?
I'm back. Is that better?
Yeah. So there was 2 questions. One, they didn't specify, but they said, have you used the Glenn Johns method for a client before?
Okay.
Do you know exactly what he's talking about?
I do. Yeah. And yes, there's and Mark, you're familiar with these. I do some writing camps every year, a couple of them where, well, they'll bring in like full-time songwriters and artists, usually like indie artists, and they'll do a week, sometimes it's less, of recording. Basically, they write together, they co-write all day, and as they're done with songs, they'll come up and we'll record them. And this is all done in like an Airbnb somewhere. And so we'll set up in like the master bedroom as a studio. And we love the Glenn Johns thing for that, because it's always just a little 4-piece Ludwig kit for me. And we do the Glenn Johns, which is, if you're not familiar with what that is, I think we do a slightly modified one, but it's one overhead that's straight off the snare drum. And then the matched one is usually down at the floor tom rim, pointing towards the hi-hat. So it's going crossways. And that's your main kit picture. And then you can use, I think true Glenn Johns only adds a kick mic maybe, but we usually add a close snare mic too. And so we'll just have 4 channels going in, and it's fantastic. If you get the balance right, it's great. It really forces the player to play in a very, very balanced way. You've got to take a lot of the overhead pair into your headphones and really play the kit in a way that's going to complement that, or it doesn't work very well.
And one more question before you go out there. Regarding phase between overhead and room, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't on the front end. I know a lot of engineers that don't. You can get really crazy and measure off things to be, in good ratios and do it. But the truth is, I want as long as my overheads are in phase with each other and the stereo mic is in phase with itself, I can, if I feel like I need to time align the track, like pull the rooms a little bit closer, then I will just do that in Pro Tools after I'm finished tracking with it. And sometimes you can hear it in a track and you kind of hear the flamming and the phase issue. Sometimes you don't, but that's part of what the room mic placement does too, is you find a sweet spot where it sounds good and it sounds good with everything. And so then it's just a matter of time alignment, but that's how I deal with it.
Cool. So you're going to mute and then go in there now?
Yeah. I'll actually leave it unmuted and you guys will be able to hear the control room vibe, and I'll just leave it here.
Okay.
and then I'll come back in and bring it back out if you got questions. You guys able to hear some of that?
Yeah, it was. I don't know if it's the iPhone or whatever. The way it was sounding, it was like super squashed.
Super distinct. Yeah, I think Zoom does that. I've heard. But you can kind of get the idea of like that's why it's important to have the remote set up out there, and that's really that's about as fast as it would be. Honestly, faster because I wouldn't be normally walking everybody through it. But just from the time that I pulled the session in to the time I started tracking, that's about how quick it would happen. And then I might do a couple of quick, I might do 2 or 3 takes until I felt like I had everything that I wanted program wise. I might comp a fill here and there or something. And then if I'm just sending 1 take back, I'll go ahead and edit and pocket it and make it feel right with whatever they've got going on programming wise. If it's that kind of thing, zip it up and send it to them.
Right. Are there any other questions out there for people who are still alive on the seminar that would want to ask any other questions to Ben while we still have him here?
Yeah, I got another quick question.
Totally.
Yeah, so on the room, you said it was like in an old garage. Can you repeat that for me a bit?
Yeah, so this building on the house we bought, the guy had a large barn kind of aluminum building thing.
Yeah.
Like I'll kind of show you guys what I mean. And it was on the property already, and he was using it as a big like workshop and garage. And so It's like a 1,200 square foot building that we then converted the interior of. But outside, it's just this kind of, as soon as the gimbal cooperates, it's just this kind of vibe.
Did you contract it, or did you build everything yourself?
I did contract it. I contracted a lot of it. I've done a lot of it myself too. The actual construction of it, I trusted to 2 guys that I found through a mastering engineer here that did a fantastic job. 2 Swedish builders that were kind of the only guys that I felt like both understood what I was doing as a studio, that it wasn't just a playroom, but also didn't expect me to have $10 million to dump into it,
Yeah.
And so they did a lot of the building, but all the sound treatment that you see around, I built all of that. I've built well, except for the two diffusers in the back. But all the sound treatment stuff I built. I did a lot of the audio wiring. And there's been a handful. I mean, there's plenty of the construction stuff that I ended up kind of jumping into once in a while here and there. Yeah. But that's kind of what we did, and it became a much bigger thing than I originally anticipated. But we're happy with the result. Yeah,
it looks sweet. It looks like an awesome room. Do you find that having the windows in the actual room where you record makes any difference on the sound quality at all?
Or no, I don't think it really does. I mean, everything's going to change things a little bit.
Right.
I think it mostly changed how I needed to treat the room, maybe slightly, The windows were the holes. He had just little sliding sort of storefront windows there.
Correct.
And now those are doubled. Those are like industrial. There's a commercial window on the outside that's a big, thick double pane. And then there's another pane of 1/4-inch glass behind that. And so it's a big, deep window. But it's just like a control room window where there's two.
It gives it a sweet vibe, and I think because I don't think I've really seen too many studios with the windows on the outside like that, so I like.
No, you usually don't see them, and I just felt like when we had it here, we had to decide whether we were going to cover them or not, and I just liked the idea of somewhere that I have to work every day, getting a little bit of daylight mattered to me a lot, and so I mean, it's on the short list to get some blinds of some sort that I can cover them up if I need to. But so far, everybody that's been in here has really enjoyed being able to have some light in, and so I really like it.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing, because after being in studios for days and weeks on end, and you don't know what time it is, you get turned around. It's nice to actually have natural lighting and not just have cans or other lights in the ceiling.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, and you can, especially in the evening, you can make it as dark in here as you want to. And the ISO rooms are kind of that way where that's the one that I'm using, this vocal booth right now. And it can be as dark. I mean, once you close the door, you could literally block out all light if you wanted to. And so, I like having that. But that's a good question. No, I don't think it affects the sound in a negative way as long as you treat the room well.
Awesome. Sweet. Thanks.
And to that point, a lot of I don't know what you guys already know about this, but for my 2 cents on treating the room and how I chose to do that, I really went with a use the information and then listen and then fix. I didn't shoot the room out before I started putting treatment up. In the live room, it's 12 feet high, so I basically looked at it as if it were going to be 2 stories. I treated the low half of one wall and the high half of the one opposite, and I did the same thing on the other 2 walls, high on one end, low on one end, and just started there. And when I got done with that, and I treated the corners of the ceiling to kind of knock those down, and when I got done with that, it tightened the room up a ton, and all of a sudden you could really, really hear the standing wave between the floor and the ceiling. And so I made a bunch more treatment and walked through here with that, and was just doing the clapping thing to hear the flutter. And wherever it was particularly bad, I would drop down a panel on the floor and place it on the floor until the flutter went away there. And I did that with all my treatment that I'd built. And wherever, once it was gone, I just put them on the ceiling right opposite of where they've been on the floor. And that's worked really well. The control room's great. I have one little standing wave issue at about 83 in the listening position, and it's not enough for me to be super worried about, but I know how to treat it, and that'll happen coming soon. But you can do a lot with a little.
There's one coming in, and then I have a question for you too. So what did you do? This is always an issue, even when we recorded over at Average Joe's. Like, what did you do AC wise to deal with keeping the control room cool, but also in the tracking room, not having airflow blowing where you can hear it on the track?
Yeah. Okay. So you can see behind me, there's a mini split behind me in the control room, kind of up near the ceiling. That's what the white thing is. And so I've got 4 of those cassettes in this building, one in each ISO room, one here, and a big one in the live room. And the big one in the live room is actually above the drums. It's behind the wall on the drums, but it's all the way 12 feet up in the air. And those things have a whisper setting on them that makes them so quiet that even if I'm doing a brush track or something, you can't hear it. We turned it off a few weeks ago before the lockdown when I had somebody over here who was doing a finger-picked guitar thing, acoustic guitar track in the live room. And we turned it off for a couple of minutes while he did that. But the building's insulated really well, so it doesn't change super fast. So that's how I do it. And that way you've got different temperature controls in each room. The ISO room can be, one temperature, and you can keep the control room another, and so forth.
So the one on the back wall is able to keep the control room cool enough with all the gear?
Yeah, it's freezing in here right now, actually. Yeah. And I've got it set to 78.
All right, here's another question coming in, multiple pieces. So it says, did you get any resonance from the drums, maybe OD piano while tracking, the drums on the shelves rattling from the snares, stuff like that?
Yeah, good question. So the drums on the snares on the shelf are on that shelf. That shelf was built, I built it a few years ago for that exact reason. I can flip the snares off and they don't rattle on the shelf because they're sitting flat. And if you have a shelf where they're this way, no matter what you do, they're still going to lay against the head and they're going to rattle. And so, no, I don't get any real resonance out of them. Now, if I stuck a mic right on top of one of those drums and played, you would definitely hear something. But it's all about sort of what you're getting. And the question of piano, same thing. I really worried about that in the room. I wondered if I was going to have to keep the lid closed and cover it. But as long as the damper pedal's down, we don't hear anything.
What is your Desert Island snare drum?
The one that's on the kit right now, it's a 14x4 A&F brass drum. Mark, how many tracks do we end up using that thing on?
Quite a few.
Like half of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Something about the thinness of that shell, and it does not sound, everybody thinks because it's 4 inches deep that it's going to sound like a piccolo, but it doesn't. It sounds a lot bigger than that. But whatever Rami's doing with those drums, that drum in particular just records beautifully all the time. And it doesn't seem to be super picky about what room it's in, which is nice too. So that would be my Desert Island snare for sure.
Anyone else have any questions before we wrap up? I think we covered a lot of ground here. And, this place that Ben built too, like he's able to do full bands there. He has room. So, if anyone has got projects in Nashville or is going to be up in Nashville, he can do a full band or an artist or put a band together. He's able to do that. A couple more questions just came in.
Yeah.
Cheapest piece of equipment that you used in a major song?
Oh, God. The cheapest piece of equipment? Man, probably like a podcast mic, that was $30 or an old 57 or something. I mean, yeah, I'll use anything if it sounds right.
Yeah, and we might, somewhere down the line do another one of these. One of the other cool things that Ben does, and we've done it on a couple of our records too, is we both like using live drums to make real loops so that it's more human sounding. So like, I would play a part, on a kick snare hat, and we'd mic it a certain way and then create that a loop, and then we would play to that in the track. So I'm sure he's still doing a bunch of that kind of stuff. Yeah. So if people want loop tracks for songs or whatever, that's another thing he does. He can make them real, or he can, do music production type of loops.
Yeah. And layering all that stuff together is such a big part of modern production now, a big live kit, a live looped kit, and some programmed elements all together sort of. Again, I think about drums now in a production manner the same way you think about electric guitars, where they layer several parts with different tones in to sort of create that soundscape. And I think we can do the same thing with drums and generate more interest than just maybe one static drum kit.
Cool. Well, if anyone has any final questions, chime in here real quick. Otherwise, I'm going to stop the recording, and we'll have this up. So if people want to check it out, and I'll try to get Ben's information too to maybe put up on a link. So if people have further questions or want to reach out to him, But yeah, it's definitely cool. I mean, and a lot of people have home studios as well. I might do another session on that. But I mean, our guitar player, a lot of the guitar tracks were done at home in his studio. So, really creating a room like Ben has is the most important for the drums. I mean, pretty much a lot of the other instruments nowadays you can do in a home project studio and still make it sound amazing. And we've tracked a couple records where we've done vocals in hotel rooms. So you weren't lucky to be part of that madness.
Yeah, I managed to miss that one, but yeah, I mean, you can do a ton. Like I said, I do that with those camps too, where we go and just there's 15 other people still playing instruments and writing and singing in the house while we're recording in the master bedroom, and those records come out sounding great. So I mean, I'm lucky to have what I have, and it allows me a lot more flexibility and versatility to do a lot of things. But you can do a lot with relatively limited set of resources.
All right, we got two final questions. One is, any advice for sound designing live drums? And then the other one, what has been your hardest session and why?
Well, I can't say that because you're here. No. Sound designing live drums. I'll answer the other question first because I'm going to ask you to clarify what you mean by that. But as far as the hardest session, I think sometimes the hardest ones were the early ones when I hadn't figured out yet that different artists and different producers all sort of had a way of doing things their way, and being able to, the more I've done it, the more I've been able to sort of identify some guys, for instance, have no idea what they want. They're totally looking to you to write the part, to pick the sounds, to do all that. And if you decide that's the way it's going to be, then the next day you're going to work for a producer that says, hey, I already programmed this part out. I just want you to play it exactly like that. And so kind of the hard ones are the ones where it takes a while for everybody to sort of get into a flow of what needs to happen to get the thing across the finish line. But I think earlier when I was just getting started, that was harder because I hadn't figured out how to do that, and how much of a priority that was, is being able to kind of walk in and find out how you can best serve whoever you're serving, whether it's an artist or a producer or, a band, and figuring out sort of what their, and producing has helped me as a session player immensely with that, of understanding you're always serving someone and they need to get what they need, and they also need to feel as good as they possibly can while they're getting it. And so, yeah, the better you get at that, the less hard the sessions get, I think.
And then advice for sound designing live drums.
Yeah. Sound designing as far as just sort of getting the sounds for live drums. Is that what we think that means?
Yeah. Wait a second. You see, I'm not sure if I heard correctly that you guys do loops. If so, how do you go about processing those? So I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Sure. Yeah, that's where you can get really creative. And so sometimes that smash mic that I showed you guys earlier, that's what I call the one that's kind of on the floor that's getting crushed by the compressor. That by itself, especially if you're just playing kick, snare, and hat, that sometimes that's a whole thing. It kind of by itself sounds a little bit like that 90s drum loop thing that we all got used to hearing Matt Chamberlain do, and then other times that's and that's when the guitar pedals and stuff come in too. Is I'll run stuff through, it might be a collection of mics that I sort of sum and run into a distortion pedal, and then run another set to a delay or a reverb, or do something to kind of just, again, that's where you can get really creative with stuff. And those little reamp modules from Radial, being able to dial those in through guitar pedals and do stuff like that is really cool and helpful, So yeah, or you can do it all in plugins too. If you've got distortion boxes and delays in Pro Tools, you can do the same thing in the box.
Well, and the coolest thing about that is that you can snap it to the grid, as little as hard as you want, so you can kind of create whatever feel you wanted.
Absolutely. Or you can even snap things, like you can add like a really unrealistic style of MPC swing or something to a live loop, and then it becomes it takes on a whole another life, you know. And so there's a lot of creative things, and that's some of the things you can use, those corrective tools to get creative, Elastic or Beat Detective or whatever, and use it to you know, go play a loop and then snap it at 100% to an MPC swing and see what it does, because it might be something really cool, you know.
Right. Well, cool. Well, thanks, Ben, for taking time out of your day and doing this today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
As we're all locked in our houses and studios for who knows how long.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's definitely, you know, more and more people are doing sessions this way. And, you know, some people are even doing ISDN where you're in real time with people. So I think as technology grows and grows, you know, it allows people to kind of, I mean, have you seen some of those videos with Andy Timmons and Rob Abisherian the last couple of days?
Yeah.
They've actually done like 3 or 4 person live studio sessions where they've put them together and then zoomed them. So
yeah,
you know, it's pretty cool stuff.
It's really exciting, and with big commercial studios being more and more of a rarity, it's a really good time to be getting good at doing this kind of thing, I think, you know.
Right. Well, cool. Thanks again. I'm going to go ahead and post this recording. If anyone has any questions, I'll also try to put Ben's information where you can reach out to him. So thank you, Ben. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
All right. Take care.